Tony, and thanks everyone for being here. And we are very glad to have Jan Bentz with us, Dr. Bentz from Germany, living in just outside of Rome, taking us to St. John Lateran, which is the Cathedral Church of Rome, on the opposite side of Rome from the Vatican. So you've got these two great churches, St. Peter's and St. John Lateran. And Jan is a wonderful guide, and this reminds us of our derivation over 1,700, 1,800, 1,900, 2,000 years from the apostles who came to the city of Rome and from the emperors who converted like Constantine and built these great churches. Dr. Bentz.
Yes, thank you, Bob. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I hope the connection is good. Bob, can you hear me well?
We can hear you.
Very good. Okay, I'm just checking. I'm sitting very close to the modem, which also makes the window being behind me. So the lighting's a little bit weird. I put two lamps here, but otherwise it would be all dark. So I do apologize, but this is just making sure that I have the best connection possible. Yes, indeed. So for all of those who have already been with me, we have last week seen the Basilica of St. Paul's outside the walls. And so I figured it would be a good follow-up to speak about and to visit, to have a small pilgrimage to the most important of the basilicas, the most important archbasilica of Rome, which is St. John the Lateran, or San Giovanni Laterano, if you want the Italian name. So what we're going to do is we're going to start as usual with our map. So we're going to travel to Italy. I think the slideshow should be starting. So I welcome you officially. Now you're gonna make it over the pond to Italy, you know, the boot of the Mediterranean, and then within Rome, we're visiting the Lateran. The Lateran is not so much central to Rome, so if you actually are in Rome, you have to travel quite a distance to get to the Lateran. Not quite as far as St. Paul's outside the walls, but the Lateran, being one of the earliest churches, wasn't in the center of Rome, but was actually on the just barely behind the city wall. Okay, so if you had gone through the city wall, the first thing you would have seen is the Lateran Church. So it's about a 3-mile walk from St. Peter's. I'm sure that you're all in great physical condition, so we could take a walk there, but I think flying in like we do just now is just perfect. So the Lateran in itself is very significant, as Bob has already mentioned, because it is the first basilica of Christianity. It is the first archbasilica of Christianity, and so the story begins with a pagan. The story of the Lateran begins with a pagan, and that pagan is Emperor Constantine. As you know, middle 3rd century Constantine takes over as Emperor of Rome, and he is the most significant emperor for all of Christianity because he is the one that converted, right? He is the one that, due to his mother, Saint Helena, converted to Christianity, and therefore became quite happy allowing Christianity to practice their faith. Now, this happened with the so-called Edict of Milan, right, which was signed in 313, so about exactly 1,700 years ago, by the emperor. Now, to not confuse this is a very important distinction. Constantine did not introduce Christianity as the main religion of the empire. Okay, many people think that, or they confuse it. This actually doesn't happen. That doesn't happen until the end of the 3rd century with Theodosius. Constantine just allows Christianity to practice their faith. And this is very important. So the Christians now are not persecuted anymore. As you know, Christians have had to suffer many persecutions in the Roman Empire, one after another. And so many died, obviously hundreds died, thousands died, hundreds of thousands died, presumably, and the exact numbers unclear, but many died publicly witnessing their faith. So Constantine is set in the situation, and he prays to the Christian God. And because his prayers are heard and he is victorious against his enemy, Maxentius, he goes to the Christians and he says, guys, what do you want me to do for your God? Okay, whatever God that may be, what do you want me to do, right? My mom told me a little bit about this Jesus guy. What is it that you need me to do? And the Christians said, well, it would be really nice if we have a church. And so Constantine says very well. Now, what we see here, why I'm starting with this image, what we see, this is actually from the Vatican, and the Vatican will visit together in October. This is from the Raphael rooms, and this is the so-called a gift of Pope Sylvester to Constantine. And you can, it's a little bit of a busy image, okay? And I'm not going to explain the image, but you can see on the left side under that hanging baldacchino, you can see Pope Sylvester, right? You can see him as a bishop with his bishop's mitre on, giving this guy kneeling in front of him a little statue of Rome, and that is Constantine. Okay, so the Pope bequeathing Rome to Constantine, the new Christian emperor. And so Constantine takes that on us, and together with the Pope, with Sylvester, they do all kinds of stuff in Rome and erect all kinds of buildings. Now, Constantine had to give to the Christians, had to give to the Christian God a so-called trophy church, so a church that was built after a victory in battle, what the ancient Romans was accustomed to do that. So he chose part of his own land to give to the Christians, and that his own land is called the Lateran, and it comes from a family, the Laterani, that actually had bequeathed it to Constantine's family. So Constantine says, look, I'm going to give you this piece of my estate, of prime real estate, and you can build your church there. Now, it actually wasn't prime real estate. It was just outside the walls, so it's a pretty precarious positioning in case of an invasion. But the Roman Empire was not that far yet, so he gave them a huge piece of land, and that in itself is a big deal. So if we can go to the next slide, what we can see is the church from the back view. And that is the back entrance, so to speak, which is the entrance that for most centuries, one more slide back, please. For most centuries, you would have seen as the main entrance. So you can see on the right the double towers, you can see the obelisk as a sign that this was very important basilica, and then you can see this big square building. So on the right you have the Lateran, and this big square building is actually the Laryn Palace. I'll speak about this in 1 second. In this image, also in the back, behind that square palace that you see in the center, you see another facade, and I'll bring up what that is because this will be important as well. We're not going to go inside today, but I do want to mention it. All right, so now we can go to the next slide. So now we go to the actual official entrance of today's Lateran Basilica, and the official entrance of today's Lateran Basilica looks something like this. There you go. Now this is still a Piranesi woodcut, so this is not a photograph, but you can see already on the outside and the back, you can see how the city wall kind of ends, and then you have, behind it is basically campagna, as the Italians call it, so countryside. If we can go to the next slide, you can see the actual photo of the basilica, of the entrance, and there you can see it. It hasn't really changed since the 17th century. On the left, big, very monumental facade, and then on the right, this red building is the palace that we just spoke about, seen from the other side, and that is the Papal Palace. So standing here is a great moment to talk about two things. Number one, that red building that you see is actually, you could call it the first Vatican. Okay, the Pope did not always live in the Vatican. Actually, that happened only rather late, mid-15th century, around 1470, when the popes decided to permanently move to the Vatican. For the longest period of time, and the early Christians, the Pope lived here. Okay, so this was the official papal residence. You have a third papal residence in Rome as well, which today is the Ministerial Palace. but we don't have to speak about that. So this is the first papal palace, and so it is extremely significant. The first popes of the first 400 years, 500 years, well, actually more than that, the popes of the first 700 years lived in this palace. Okay, it was burned down a couple of times, it had to be rebuilt a couple of times, but nonetheless, this is the first Vatican. So we have the first church of Christianity in the West. We have the first papal residence right next to one another. So that's a very good place to talk about this. Now, before, yeah, exactly. Thank you, Robert, for the comment. And before you get too confused, and it is very confusing, I think we can narrow down the stages of the Lateran with maybe 4 stages. Okay, number 1 is the construction of the Lateran, which is 314, right after the Edict of Milan by Pope Sylvester I. Okay, so 3rd century. Then it was restored by Leo the Great in 450. Then it was rebuilt in the first millennium, and then it got this new facade and basically a facelift and a general makeover in the Baroque time, so mid 17th century. Those are basically what you need to remember. 3rd century, 4th century, 10th century, and 17th century. Now, as many churches in Rome, the Lateran is and has been very much alive, quote unquote, which means that it never dilapidated. Okay, it was always rebuilt, it was always restored, it was always restructured, it was always renovated, it was always repainted, there was always something added on. And that makes it extremely hard to talk about the different parts, okay? Because when we're inside, I'll speak some about the ancient frescoes, the original frescoes. I'll talk about medieval parts. I'll go and talk about the Baroque parts, and that's all very strange. That it seems like a mishmash, but that's just the nature of the church. So I do apologize for that, and I'm going to keep it to the minimum. But I think those 4 time periods are very easy to remember. Okay, before we actually go into the church itself, I do have to point out a significant factor that you cannot miss. You shall not miss, because it is extremely vital for early Christian pilgrims. And that is the location of the Lateran Basilica. The Lateran Basilica, together with 2 other buildings, they're all located together in Rome, and these were the most important pilgrim destinations for Christianity, okay, for the longest period of time. Today, when I say Rome and I think Catholicism, you think Vatican. Rightly so. This is perfectly fine. I do the same thing. And I'm sure I have been to the Vatican more times than I've been to the Lateran Church. So that's completely natural. But if you had lived 1,000 years ago and I would have said Rome, Christianity, Catholicism, you would have thought Lateran Basilica. If I would have told you in the 13th century Rome, you would have thought Lateran Basilica. If I would have told you Lateran in the 16th century, you would have still Rome, you would have probably still thought Lateran Basilica. Okay, so this is the absolute most and prime and absolute best Roman pilgrim site in Rome. So what are the other 2 buildings that I mentioned? One is, and that's what we see on the next slide, the Basilica of the Holy Cross in Jerusalem, built by the mother of Constantine in the same part of the estate. You have to walk about half a mile away from the Lateran to get it. It was quite a big piece of land that Constantine bequeathed there. So you can see the facade here. And this is the church where you have parts of the relic of the true cross, you have parts of the relic of the crown of thorns, and parts of and the nail. Actually, Constantine through St. Helena also got to take the nails with which Jesus was crucified. So you had this, so you can imagine this is very, very important. And in fact, in the center of the church, you can see the cross, and you can see the 2 angels holding up, the spear and the instruments of the Passion. The 3rd building that is very important, that's in the vicinities, and if we were on site, we could walk there. We would have to go through Italian traffic though, so luckily we can just do this here while sipping a cup of tea. Is on the next image. The next image is the Holy Stairs. Now the Holy Stairs, this is the outside, and this is was freshly restored just last year, I believe. It was open, it was closed actually for 1 year about, and then they restored it. You can see the main entrance, and you already saw this on the first woodcut that I showed you, and now we can maybe go inside. The next image is the holy stairs on the inside, and you can see people are praying. They're actually all on their knees. You're not allowed to just walk up the stairs. You have to go up and praying on your knees, and that's what pilgrims do when they go there. And you can see that they're actually not on the stairs themselves. They're on them like a wooden casing, right? Now this wooden casing has slits, and through the slits you can see the marble of the original staircase. Okay, now so what are we dealing with here? We're dealing with a staircase that leads up to the papal reliquary chapel. And originally this was all attached into the papal palace. So we can see the next picture, and you'll see a very, very elaborate reliquary. The very, very elaborate reliquary was called the Sancta Sanctorum, the Holy of Holies, recalling the Temple of Jerusalem. And so these three buildings, the Lateran, Santa Croce in Jerusalem, or a Holy Cross in Jerusalem, and the Holy Stairs, form the pilgrim destination for all pilgrims from the birth of Christianity, well, up until this day, but mostly up until the 18th century, because then the Vatican became kind of a more flashy destination. On the next slide, and I'm sorry that I have to do this long of an excursion before we even go into the Basilica, but it really is important to understand this. The next picture shows you a map of ancient Jerusalem. Okay, and you don't have to look at all of the details, but the three things that I want you to look at is the Dome of the Rock, okay, which is today is the Al-Aqsa Mosque, right? The Dome of the Rock, and then you have a little bit north of that, there's a little square, a little rectangle. It's called the Praetorium. That's where Pilate was. And then you have a little bit to the left, following the wall of the Praetorium, you have the Holy Sepulchre Church. Bob, I think, has been there many times on pilgrimage. I actually haven't myself, but I'm dying to go at some point in the future. These three spots, the Dome of the Rock, the Praetorium, and the Holy Sepulchre, are the three most important, significant points of Jesus' passion, right? Because it's a temple. It's where he was sent to Pontius Pilate in the Praetorium, and then where he was crucified and buried, right? So these three spots. And so if we go to the next slide,
Dr.
I have done this in a. Yo, sorry, Bob, go ahead.
To say, I'm so impressed once again by the historicity. We are talking history here. These buildings are still here today, or their foundations are. So where Jesus walked and where Pilate judged him, where he whipped the money changers from the temple, are right there, just as the buildings in Rome have been there for hundreds and hundreds of years, back to the time of Constantine. So as Catholics, when we look at these things, we're not looking at stories. We're looking at history.
Yeah.
That's all I wanted to say.
Quite right. That brings it to the point. And so what I've done is in a very rudimentary form, I'm sorry, pointing out these three spots in Rome on a modern map, just taken from Google Maps. And you can see they're the same location. Dome of the Rock, Praetorium, and the burial of Christ, or the place of the Passion of Christ. So these three spots, this triangle, if you will, is imported from the Holy Land to Rome. We are going to the New Jerusalem when we go to the Lateran Basilica. We are visiting the spot that the pilgrims who lived in the West could not visit in person because it was too long of travels to go to the Holy Land. So they would see it in Rome. And there you had the Passion instruments, you had parts of the Praetorium, the Holy Stairs, right? Of those of you who have seen the Passion, very impressive scene when Jesus is led up to the place where Pontius Pilate presents him to the people. That's the holy stairs that St. Helena, just as an imperial mother, you can do that, just kind of ripped out and brought to her own home chapel, right? Because as one does. And then you have the first church. So this is all very well thought out and has developed very well by the beginning, by the first Christians. So I'm sorry, this is a long preface before we even go to the Basilica, but I think it is worthwhile noting that we are entering Jerusalem today while going to Rome. So now I can go to the next picture, and that just talks about the Basilica. I have talked about this last tour again. I'm going to repeat this because it is something that is so vital that it is not, I cannot get tired of repeating it. It's very, very important to understand this. The Lateran is a basilica, and as a basilica, it is a reception hall. So you can see a fantastic floor plan of the Lateran, and you can see how there's a main nave, and then there are two side naves. And so you walk in, and from the top, it kind of looks like a cross, right? So with a choir, and it doesn't look kind of like a cross, it is a cross. So you have the choir, you have the altar, the papal altar in the middle, and then you have the main nave, and you have the transept, so the two kind of the horizontal bar of the cross, and then the entrance hall is divided into two side naves. And I just wanted you to see that from the top, because that way it's very easy to understand. On this floor plan, you also have the papal palace, but we don't really have to go in depth. Okay, next picture. So what we're visiting then is the first and most important church in Christianity, and it has a very awkward title. Okay, not a title that you can put easily on Twitter if you only have 160 characters at your disposal. So this is the church, the Cathedral of Rome, of the most holy Savior and of the saints John the Baptist and the Evangelist in Lateran, mother and head of all churches in Rome and in the world. So this is literally the head and mother church of all churches in the world. Your church in your parish links back somehow to that first church of the Lateran. And maybe even though they don't resemble one another, there is a link, right? There is a link of tradition that connects them. So what we here see is yep.
Could we just read that those two middle words above the entrance? Just
certainly.
What do we see there?
So it says, what we see the dedication by Clement XII, who is one of the popes who restored the facade. And so the center two words are the original dedication. Christo Salvatori, Christ the Savior. In the very, very, very beginning, you didn't really have that, the idea of dedicating churches to a specific saint yet. You would dedicate them to specific places, right? Holy Sepulchre, Holy Cross, and then obviously Jesus himself, so Christ the Savior. And that's what you see here. And then on the right, if you go to that very heavily abbreviated Latin sentence on the right, it says, Honoris Sancti Johanni Baptista et Evangelistis. So in honor of the saints John the Baptist and the Evangelist.
Okay.
Strongly abbreviated. But so the main one, Christus Salvatori, Christ the Savior.
That's really interesting then. So the central word is the churches to Christ the Savior. And then also in honor of St. John Baptista, you see, I-O-A-N is John, Baptista et E-V-A-N-G is Evangelista. The writer, John, the writer of the Gospel of John. So that's how the church became St. John in Lateran.
And since I know that Bob likes Latin inscriptions, I even got one more. So if you go to the next slide, then we can see, yes, of course, another dedication. I put this specifically in for you. So if we go to the next slide, you can see what I just talked about, the lengthy title, right? The Holy Lateran Ecclesiarum Omnium, so of all churches in the city, urbis et orbis, and in the world, Ecclesiarum Mater Caput. The church, the mother, Mater, et Caput, head, the mother and head of all the churches in Rome and in the world. And if you remember, the Pope twice a year on Christmas and Easter gives this big blessing, right, for the city and the world, and it is usually broadcasted as the Urbi et Orbi blessing, right, the blessing of the city and the world. And here you see the same two words, Urbis et Orbis, because this is the mother church of the city and of the world. So.
Thank you, John.
You're very welcome. All right, so next we go to the atrium. I know most of you would probably just stumble through the atrium and don't really stop there, but atriums are always good to kind of collect ourselves before we actually enter the church. And there is our famous Emperor Constantine, all the way in the back on the left side of the atrium. So next slide will show him to you a little bit closer up. And you can see Constantine in a very classical position of the general of the Roman army. Looks like a pagan statue, right? So yeah, he started as a pagan, then he converted, and now we honor him as a Christian. Very good. If we go to the next slide, we can see the main gate. And so the main gate, for a couple of reasons, is significant. First of all, it is ginormous, and unfortunately, this picture doesn't render justice to that. So, if you'd imagine a full-grown adult would barely reach to the first kind of the first rectangles, the first kind of boxes that ornament the bottom church. You can see kind of like darker spots. That's where people touch it because that's as high as they can go. Okay, it is a massive door, and why is it so massive? Because it is one of the original doors of the Roman Empire and the most important buildings of the Roman Empire, which is the Senate Hall. So in the next picture I have, I just included a photo of you. This is that's the inside. Oh dear. Okay. The next picture. There you go. The next picture is if you go one further. I'm sorry. If you go one further, you can see the Curia Julia, so the curial building of ancient Rome, that big kind of shoebox looking thing, and that is the original door, comes from that. This is the Roman Forum. So Christians have always liked to recycle parts of older buildings, and this is quite magnificent because this gate is very ancient. Okay, it's indeed more ancient than Christianity. And it is still completely intact. So that's something to marvel at. If you go one slide backwards, and I'm sorry, I can show you the gate from the inside, and there you have a good sense of the size because there's a little tiny person there on the right bottom, right? Lady reading her book. So there you get a size you get a sense of the size of this gate. So massive. Okay, so let's go further. So we go 2 slides further because I just showed you the Curia, and then the next one is the same. It's just from another angle. But now we can enter the church proper, and here we have the main nave of this gorgeous basilica, of this gorgeous cathedral. I personally, and don't judge, prefer the Lateran to St. Peter's Basilica. Not because I don't think St. Peter's Basilica is the most amazing church in the world, but I think the Lateran has a little bit more of a sense of a unified whole. The St. Peter's is it's so big that you don't really get the feeling that it is one building. Every side chapel of St. Peter's Basilica is as large as a church, in a village. So it's a little bit hard to get a sense. In the Lateran, it's a little bit easier. This is my personal opinion, and you don't have to agree with it. I'm just saying this, but I do. I very much like this cut. Now, when we look at the Lateran, there's one thing that may strike you, if you have a keen sense for art and decoration, and maybe a little bit of the history, is they're pretty much, save the ceiling, they're pretty much 2 colors here, and that's white and off-white. And you ask yourself, what happened here? Why? This does not look like an ancient basilica at all. This doesn't look like, like a, I don't know, medieval. It doesn't look like an ancient temple at all. What it looks like is actually the Lateran after it has been renovated by Francesco Borromini. So we see the 17th century facelift here. Borromini had to come in under Innocent X, who was his big patron in Rome, the Pamphili Pope, Innocent X, and he brought him in and he said, clean up this church, please, Borromini. And he knew that Borromini is very good at cleaning up things. Now, Borromini basically entered a church, okay, where you would go in the main gate or you go in one of the side doors and you would immediately fall into a pit. And then you would kind of crawl out of the pit, and then you would go further, and then you would stumble above, a cardinal tomb that was in the floor. And then you would go around that, and then you would see a wall, and there are 3 popes buried there. And then you would go further, and you fall into another pit because it was not kept up very well. And then you would get out of that pit, and then you see a reliquary. And Borromini is like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. Okay, this is way too much stuff that has accumulated over 1,500 years of Christianity. I'm going to order this. Okay, I'm going to, get some structure into this. So what you see today is the result of that ordering. Okay, he gets rid of all of the tombs that are all scattered. He puts them in the wall. Great solution, right? You can look at it. It's not kind of weird. You don't have to walk on them. They're in the wall. They're have their name in it, and there you go. So you have a bunch of cardinals, and I'll show you in a second some of examples of this. You have a bunch of cardinals in the wall. You have a bunch of popes in the wall. So all of that is really fun and dandy. There's one thing that even Francesco Borromini could not touch, and that was the ceiling. Okay, and so you can see the ceiling being the original medieval gilded wooden ceiling. Okay, and it is quite impressive. But as you can imagine, it gave Borromini kind of a headache. Okay, him really liking white and off-white, and he had to deal with that ceiling. And the Pope's like, "You're not going to touch that ceiling." He's like, "Okay." So he cleaned up everything, but the ceiling had to remain the same. So that's what gives this kind of weird sense of the ceiling looking completely out of place. So that was Bernini's boon, and it remains to be kind of a strange juxtaposition. All right, if we go to the next slide, I'll show you some of the statues. The statues, funny enough, are not funny enough, but are the 12 apostles, 6 and 6 on each side. Funny enough, they look like they were done by Bernini. They were not. In fact, you would probably not recognize any of these sculptors. Okay, so this one and the 3 on that I show you are by Rusconi, who is from the school of Bernini, but it's not a master at all. And if you don't study art history, you probably never heard of him. And so that just shows you just how good even like a B-rate sculptor was in the Baroque time. Okay, they had to be really good to get commissioned. So this is Rusconi, and this is Saint Matthew. Sant Matthäus, right? You can see the name underneath, and it's a very just kind of gigantic statue that you kind of walk by as the first one on your right, and you're like, wow, like I'm really treading in the halls of giants, right? That these are the giants of the faith. Okay, these are the NBA all-stars of the faith. Okay, these are the big guys, right? And you walk in the middle, in the center aisle, and you're like, wow, 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 wow. You just go and going kind of fanboying out. So Matthew here is very cool because you have Matthew as a tax collector, but also most importantly, obviously the author of gospel. So he has his gospel in his hands. The tax collector, Rusconi, put in by him having conquered money. And so he stands on a satchel of money, right, of gold coins. And this was the Baroque, so they had to be playful somehow. So you have this tiny gold coin kind of spilling into our reality, right? Spilling in, kind of tipping over, and you just as a pilgrim kind of hope to like kind of snatch it, be like, well, I'm gonna take one of these home, this is cool. So you have this on the bottom where he stands on. So I always like that. The next statue that I have for you, which makes sense to show you because it is the dedicative saint, is Saint John the Evangelist. Saint John the Evangelist, very easy to pick out because he is very young. He doesn't wear a beard, okay, and he has the eagle as his sign, and also he obviously has a gospel in his hands. So once you have a young apostle that doesn't wear a beard, it's Saint John the Evangelist, and the eagle basically gives it away. Bob. You're muted. Bob, you gotta unmute yourself.
Sorry.
Yep.
We have two young people on this pilgrimage who were young lovers, and they got married, exchanged their vows in the side chapel of Saints John the Baptist and John the Evangelist, Richard and Catherine Core. So it's wonderful that you're talking about these side chapels and these saints. And here's I just wanted to mention that to all the pilgrims.
Very good. Well, congratulations. Great. So this is St. John, and we can move on to another one that I picked out just because he's a little bit strange. Saint Bartholomew, who, as you know, maybe was skinned alive, and so oftentimes you can see him with his skin in hands. And so here's a little bit more tasteful. He has, his skin in his toga, and it's kind of hanging out, but you can see his face on the skin. So I love it. And again, it's this little bit of a Baroque playfulness, like, kind of putting in a gruesome thing, but putting it in a very aesthetically beautiful framework. So there you have Saint Bartholomew. These are just 3 of the 12 apostles. We can go through all 12 of them, but we want to also look at some other parts of the church, I think. So in the next picture, you can see the monumental ceiling, and it gives you maybe a sense of why the Pope didn't want Borromini to touch it, because Borromini would have probably turned this into like a white ceiling. So this is gilded wood, and was actually very important that it was very symmetrical, like it is, so that the weight was equally distributed, right? There are 3 papal crests. The one that we're looking at is Pope Pius VI. The one in the center is Pope Pius V, and then the last one is Pope Innocent X. And what you can see, and I always like to point that out, in the decoration is the instruments of the Passion in the middle, around the center crest. But around this crest that we're looking at, the one of Pius the Fourth, is the instruments for Mass, right? So you have an incense boat, and then you have a thurible, right, where you burn incense in, and then you have 2 trumpets, like the fanfares, probably harking back to the liturgy of the Temple of Jerusalem. So I always like that. And then the center, it's a little bit harder to see, they're further away, are the instruments of the Passion. So the spear, the pillar on which Christ was scourged, obviously the crown of thorns, the bucket with the vinegar, right, that was given to Christ before he died, or that was offered to Christ before he died, and so forth. So, and the scourging instrument. So that's all there. So even within the glory, you kind of have a reminder of the core of the faith is not golden ceilings, right? Even though we like to look at them, they're nice, but it's the story of the Passion that's really in the center here. So a nice little reminder of that. Good. Next picture is just a detail of what I spoke about, which is so maybe we can switch to the next one. Yeah, there you can see it. And there you can also see that actually the underlaying background is actually colored as well. It's blue and red. It's very beautiful. I mean, it's amazing. Again, Roman pilgrimages into Roman churches always give hopefully great inspiration to interior decorators. So take it away. All right, so next one, I want to show you just 3 kind of randomly picked, honestly, tombs of cardinals and popes. So this is one cardinal pope, and this is one Portuguese cardinal. You can see that in the inscription. Bob, if you want to read that inscription, be my guest. I'm not going to be able to really read most of that. That's a Sepulchrum Domini Antoni, Cardinal of Portugalensis. So that far I can read. So the sepulcher of the Lord Anthony Cardinal from Portugal. So that was the chief cardinal of Portugal, and he got his tomb. That was one of the tombs that was done in the early Middle Ages, and it looks, quite beaten, especially the upper slab of that sarcophagus. And that was one of the things that Bernini just put in the wall. So he created this kind of cave and then put it in there so you don't have to stumble upon it, because it would have been somewhere kind of central to the Lateran, like you still find in some French churches today, where the tombs are like in the middle. You're like, what is this doing here? You have to walk around. It's a little bit awkward. So good. Next picture is a little bit more fancy. There you go. This is another cardinal's tomb, so you can always tell by the cardinal's stem or crest on the left and right bottom of the front statues. Right, there's a cardinal's hat and his crest, and so this is also, it's a medieval, very clearly medieval sarcophagus with very rudimentary writing. Okay, so this is 11th, 12th century, probably 11th century, actually earlier than that. And you have even medieval statues, but Borromini, because it's Borromini and everything has to be flamboyant and everything has to be Baroque and everything has to be curved, he puts that into that nice curve. So he takes the original medieval mosaics, the original medieval statues and the original medieval sarcophagus, and he creates this fantastic Baroque wall tomb, right? So I just wanted to show you because it has a nice contrast. And the next image is actually one of particular interest, probably also to Monsignor Figueiredo and Bob, because this is the tomb of Innocence III. Now, if you know anything of Innocence III, you probably know that he invoked a crusade, so he's very famous for that. But most importantly, he, after a dream, allowed Saint Francis of Assisi to found an order. Right? So Innocence X received Saint Francis. He didn't want to initially, but then he had a dream at night with Saint Francis holding up a church. More specifically, holding up the church of what? The Lateran, of this very church we're standing in. Right? So this church, he's holding it up, and outside you have a statue commemorating this event, this dream. And so Innocence said, oh boy, this guy, even though he's wearing a sackcloth, is very important for the church. So we better hear him. We better let him come in. So he had, he had his audience, and so Saint Francis could found the order, and Innocence was ultimately the pope that established the Franciscan order.
Okay, Dr. Jan, very important that you mentioned that. We've talked about it on our pilgrimage to Assisi and the life of St. Francis. This was a critical moment in the life of Francis. He came down from Assisi to Rome, to this church. The Pope was not going to see him. He had this dream, and then he agreed to see him. And I believe it was 1209, and Francis was about 28 years old. And he had several followers with him. And this Pope Innocent approved the rule of the Franciscans. So the way of living the Christian life had been almost entirely either you're an ordinary person or you go into the Benedictine monastic order, you became a monk. Francis sort of offered a third way of being, not a monk and not a secular person, but a friar, a brother. So for us to see the tomb of Innocent III, who received Francis and blessed Francis, is very moving. Right there was the critical moment in the life of St. Francis. Thank you.
Bob, do you know the story that is connected with this tomb, the kind of Roman? There's a Roman myth, an urban legend, I should say, of Pope Innocent III's bones rattling whenever a pope is about to die. And I kid you not, especially during the last days of John Paul II and of Benedict after he resigned, Italians would still go to Innocent III and kind of like hang out there and be like, okay, when is it going to happen? And apparently some Italian lady heard before John Paul II actually died on that day in the morning, Innocent III's bones rattling. Okay, so if you have too much time on your hands, you can just camp outside Innocent III, and you'll know when the next pope's going to be elected. So that's it's
under 24-hour video surveillance.
Yes, we should do it. See, now you can do that. See, this is great. You should suggest that to the Vicariate of Rome, and obviously it has to have audio as well, because otherwise you're not going to be able to hear the rattling. So there you go.
And we then in this inscription to Innocent III, we've got the date over there. I wonder if our pilgrims can read that date.
Okay, so Pilgrims, take it away. I'm not going to spoil anything.
Well, the M the M is for mille. The end is 1,000. The
Yep.
the D is 500. The C is 100. So it's 1,500, 600, 700, 800. Then the X goes before the next C. So this is 1891. 1,500, 6, 7, 8, 9 minus 10 is 1890, 1891, that one at the end. And that's in the reign of Leo the 13th, XIII, the famous Leo the 13th with his social encyclical. He's the one who organized something to do with this tomb.
Yes. He restored it. He regilded it, and if we go to the next slide, we can actually see his own tomb, which is also in the Lateran.
Oh, there he is.
There's Leo the 13th. He is one of the most impressive popes of the turn of the century, 1900. He did write Rerum Novarum, which is the first encyclical really dealing with the problem of the workers and the aftermath of the Industrial Revolution. So to the left, you see a man and that's dressed as a worker with a little hammer on his side, right, and holding up the rosary. And Leo the 13th was also the oldest reigning pope, just till a couple of days ago, where Benedict XVI, who was an emeritus pope, though, became the oldest person that ever was a pope. But Leo the 13th turned 93, I believe. He was very old. He was born in 1810, and he lived till 1903. So that's 97. No, that's 93. Sorry, 93.
93.
So there you go. Leo the 13th is also, by the way, the first pope we have on film. Random fact of the day. So he just he walks from one place of his room into the other. It's like a 3-second video, but it's the first pope to be on video. So there you go.
I could just mention one little thing. This idea of dealing with social issues, of course, there's always justice and injustice, the good master, the good servant. But human science and technology created the industrial age. We made machines, starting in the late 1700s with the steam engine and things. And by the time Leo came along, the world had been transformed. For thousands of years, people had carried things and pushed their carts and carried their grain. But we have an industrialized world where a machine can do the work of 1,000 or 10,000 men. And the first reflection on how this needed to be understood and dealt with by moral relation in a moral way was by Leo the 13th, and we're still trying to do it today. But that's why we have to. Anyway,
it's something that will never really be resolved. It's always going to be a reform, like a new application of the church social teaching. Very good. So now from this tomb we can turn to the center, to the center transept, and there we can see the medieval Gothic baldacchino. See, I told you, I spoiled this for you. I told you I'm going to talk about Baroque and Gothic and medieval. So this is the baldacchino of the church, of the original church, how it was rebuilt after the fire in 1100. And this is above the main altar, right, with reliquaries of John the Evangelist and of St. Peter, I believe. And so this kind of looks out of place because it is older than the rest. And yes, it is older than the rest. And again, the basilica does include many ages or things from many ages within it. Actually, it's going to get even older when you look at the main mosaic. There's a very famous story, which is unpleasant, but I think it is still worthwhile sharing, talking about the Lateran, because the Lateran was also one of the targets of Napoleon and Napoleon's sack of of Rome. And that was not the first sack of Rome that the Lateran had to suffer under. The first sack of Rome, 1571, what is just called the sack of Rome, when the armies of the Germans and the French and the English and the Flemish kind of turned against the Pope and attacked Rome. And by sacking, meaning destroyed it or grabbed gold, still looted it, looted and rioted. And so very famously, the reliquary was taken out of this baldacchino, the reliquary of John the Evangelist, and they played soccer with his head on the street. That's a very famous story that who knows if it's true, but it did make the history books. So rather unpleasant, and also a reminder that the Pope is never really safe in a secularized world, right? That instance, by the way, made the Pope institute the Swiss Guard, because in the sack of Rome, all of the armies, all of the kings, all of the generals turned against the Pope, and the only one that stayed with him were the Swiss. And as a sign of gratitude, he established the Swiss Guard as a protector of the Pope. That was 500 years ago, right? Almost 500 years ago. So they're still it today, right? So the Swiss Guard, if you see them, they're still alive. So again, this is all historical. It has all these links to actual history. All right, now I want to go to one of the side chapels, all right, which is the side chapel of the Last Supper. And so if you go to the next slide, we will see the ginormous and oversized reliquary of one of the most important relics of Christianity. But, and I'm going to keep you in suspension, one word about relics. Okay, one word about relics. We have a list of the relics of the Sancta Sanctorum in the 8th century. Okay, all of the other relics, all saints that are before the 8th century are not listed on the official papal list of relics. It does not mean that they're not real. It just means they're not listed among the official papal archives of relics. The Lateran has been, and still is the richest collection of relics for Christianity. Now, the Pope and the popes over the years, over the decades, over the centuries, over the millennia, have given relics away because they said, well, it is important that they don't just stay all in Rome, but that people in local churches have relics as well, so that they have a close connection to the individual saint. And that leads us to one of the key principles of Christianity. We are, my dear pilgrims, we are a church of personal witness. It's not a church of a book. It's not a religion of a book. Sure, we have the Bible, but the Bible, and especially the New Testament, is just the story of a bunch of guys who hung around the Son of God. And as we know, Jesus is the Word of God, not a written down word. In fact, Jesus says, right, the word kills, the Spirit makes alive or awakens, right? So we are not a religion of the book. We are a religion of people. You are Catholic because your parents were Catholic, because their parents were Catholic, because their parents were Catholic, or maybe they converted because of someone else who was Catholic. They were Catholic, and again, no, Jesus Christ. Right? So we are closely tied to these, our buddies in heaven. And this is an idea that the Lateran strongly invokes. By going through the main nave, you have the all-stars of the faith. By going into the different reliquaries, the different sections, the different cardinals. Why do these cardinals have elaborate tombs? Because they're witnesses of the faith. They died for their faith. They suffered for their faith. They had to go and talk to nasty kings and nasty princes, and they had to go to war for their faith. And that's why they're buried here. So you go, and today you think, well, Cardinal of Portugal, who cares, right? Well, but that Cardinal of Portugal maybe made it possible so that the Portuguese can actually believe in Jesus Christ. So that's just a word about relics, because relics is always a kind of a hot topic. So I wanted to give you maybe the principle first. But what we're looking at now is the reliquary of the tabletop, the mensa of the table of Peter, so the altar of Peter on which he on which he ate, and then there's a big argument of if he actually celebrated mass on it or not. But anyways, the tabletop of Peter in Rome. Okay, and so here you have that relic, and so the next slide will show you a close-up of that reliquary, and you can see the Last Supper strongly invoking this idea of the Last Supper and then the continuating suppers, the continuating masses all throughout the world, primarily in Rome, obviously the seatbed of the Christian faith. And you can see the wood is behind the curtain, right? So there's a curtain that's actually open, and then you have the little wooden slab. It's a bit smaller than the reliquary, actually. Then you have the golden framed reliquary. So there's some confusion about this, if this was actually the tabletop of the Last Supper. I don't have a conclusive answer to this. I'm not by all means Christian archaeologist, so you would have to ask those who know. But what I can say, which is realistic, is that this was the table of Peter. And this was not something uncommon. We have the chains of Peter as well. We have the chains that bound St. Paul. We saw that last week, if you remember, in St. Paul's outside the wall. So it's not uncommon that Christians, once the apostle, once the leader was put to death, they kept his stuff, right? Kind of like you keep your stuff from your parents, because it's an emotional attachment. You want to keep the jewelry of your mom, right? My wife has the jewelry of her mother. Why? You could always just melt it, sell it, you get the money, you buy something else. Like, no, this piece of jewelry is very important. It's very significant, right? Because once your parents die, then it's a reminder of their love to you and of just their presence on earth. So apostles or Christians were always very keen on collecting these things from their fathers in the faith, the apostles. So, anyways, so much for the record. Bob, yes.
I do recall some people claiming, and I think the church says that this is from the table in the upper room in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Now, I guess there's been some scholarly dispute about that, but that was the claim, I thought, that this was actually the Last Supper table, or pieces of wood from that table. And so I'm now interested in investigating this question further. Maybe we'll come back to it on another occasion. Let's see what
I would love that. Again, yes, and I'm totally convinced that it is. I don't. Again, it's always, I always like to check my sources, and I just have not had the time to conclusively find an answer. That's what I told you. But yes, I agree. I think this is the Last Supper table. But yeah, well, you would have to ask the archaeologist. I think so.
It's kind of impressive then to have that, and to think about Jesus at the moment that he celebrated, in essence, the first Mass, and he handed the bread and the wine. So I'm deeply moved to be here with you, Jan. Thank you for bringing us here.
Of course, my pleasure. So now we are actually approaching the center apse of the church, and so on the next slide you will see the Papal Throne. St. Peter's Basilica certainly is the largest church on earth, largest Catholic church on earth. It is the center of attention for all of the papal liturgies because the Pope lives there now, and it is larger than the Lateran. But nonetheless, the Lateran Basilica is the official Cathedral of Rome, meaning the official seat of the Bishop Rome. The word cathedral comes from the word cathedra, which is the seat, the actual chair or the actual throne of a teacher, right? And so it is the bishop's chair that is actually important in that church, not so much the church. The cathedral just gets its name from the bishop's chair. So what we're looking at then is that very important chair. This is the chair of the Pope of Rome, of the Bishop of Rome, and therefore is, is elevated. It's a very special place. It has the columns around it. It has a golden background, also recalling, right, heaven, recalling that it's the divine authority that makes the Pope the vicar of Christ, and is still used today. Now, before we talk about the throne more, let's look up, okay, and let's look at the apse mosaic. So on the next picture, you can see very clearly the detail of the apse mosaic. And as so often, it's not a painting; it's a mosaic because it is much more well. It's much more resistant to humidity and temperatures and all of that, being made out of stone. And here you have a very clear, very basic iconography, as we've already seen in San Clemente, as we've already seen in St. Paul's outside the walls. And so what we have is we have the heavens open, the cherubim, okay, around it, the angels around Jesus. Then you have a Jesus that looks a little bit like he could use some coffee on his heavenly throne. And then you have the gold in the back, indicating heaven. And who is in heaven? Well, the all-stars of the faith. So from left to right, we have St. Paul, we have St. Peter, we have a little bit smaller, yet important, we have St. Francis of Assisi, even smaller and being kind of like patted on the head by Mary. I love that. And this recalls, maybe if you recall, St. Paul's, right? Honorius III, tiny Pope, to the feet of Jesus. Here, Mary is kind of like petting the head of Pope Nicholas IV. And then on the other side, you have St. John the Baptist. You have another Franciscan to balance it out, St. Anthony of Padua. Very important for all of us. You know it, car keys being lost and stuff. St. Anthony is your guy. And then you have St. John the Evangelist, who is young, who has no beard, and who has his gospel in his hands. And on the far right, we have St. Andrew. So here you have the most important saints, really, for this church. You have Christ the Savior in the center. You have John the Baptist, John the Evangelist, and then you have even St. Francis of Assisi, all standing in paradise, indicated by the flowers that they're standing on this kind of grass, and then the 4 rivers that flow forth from the cross. So you have Jesus Christ, underneath him is the dove, the Holy Spirit, which kind of has this kind of rays of grace, right? And then you have the cross in the middle, and then you have the 4 rivers, to which all of the sheep come, right? The 4 rivers, the waters, right? The water of life, the source of life, Jesus Christ himself. Maybe one word about the cross. Yeah, sorry, Bob, go ahead.
Well, Dr. Jan, I like the pilgrims just to feel that they can read the inscriptions. So the second one from the left, can they all read that? It is an S on the top with a little line over that. If you can see it, can everyone see that? And then it's P-E-T-R-V-S. That's Petrus. Because in the inscription in the Latin, the V is a U. And so you can read it. That's all. I wanted everyone to see that they could read it themselves, in case they forget.
Actually, also my conviction is still that medieval mosaic makers just did that for 21st century tour guides so that they don't have to memorize the names. That's just my 2 cents, but that's,
Okay, and then the other 2, like the John the Baptist with the kind of wild hair there, just to the right of the cross, you have the S with the line over it is Saint, and then you have I-O-H-A-N-N-E-S, Johannes, John. That's his name. And then on the other side, you have B-A-P-T-I-S-T, Baptiste. It's all written there. You can read it. That's all I wanted to say.
Yep, quite right. So the cross in the middle is a little bit maybe unfamiliar to you. It's a cross that is made up of little compartments and they're all gold. And then they have gemstones. And so this is the representation of a so-called croce gemmata, so a gemmed stone or gemmed cross or gemstoned cross. And this would be the cross. This would be what the reliquary of the true cross would have looked like that St. Helena brought back. So the maker of the mosaic would have looked like not any cross, but the cross to incorporate into his mosaic, right? By the way, and this may be too much of a tangent, I hope it's not, but you all still know from your Easter Triduum celebrations that during Holy Week, the cross, or all crosses in a church, are veiled. Bob, do you still practice that in your home parish?
Yes.
Have you seen this before? Yeah. So they're veiled with a purple cloth, right? And it always struck me. I always said, well, why on earth during the Triduum, when we literally are meditating Christ's crucifixion, why do we close up? Why do we kind of wrap Christ's crucifixion in cloth? That's like the only time where we actually need to look at it and be like, okay, this is actually what happened. That tradition of veiling the cross for Holy Week goes back to the Lateran Basilica, because this true cross, the croce gemmata, was put on the altar, and that cross was veiled because it was so glorious with tons of gold and gemstones that they said, well, okay, so we're gonna hide the glory. And then you could just see the outline of the cross, and then on Easter Sunday, at the vigil, after the vigil, then you would, lift it, and you could see the true cross again in all of its full glory and also full splendor. So it's very interesting that the modern crucifix, we keep the tradition, but we actually exchange the cross, right? But this tradition roots here in the Lateran. So for those of you who are interested, all right, let's end with the Papal Throne. So the next image where you can see the cathedra. And so this is the place where the Bishop of Rome, kind of exercises his power as a bishop. And so the Pope usually comes to celebrate Mass in Lateran a couple of times during the year, most famously on Holy Thursday, right, where it's also the washing of the feet. And then you have a choir left and right, which is a wooden choir, where you have all of the, you have some cardinals and then religious, Franciscans, Dominicans, Benedictines who are joining him, who are invited to join in the given festivities. So in the next picture, we can see this throne in action. This is a picture with John the 23rd. And so there you can see him in full regalia on that very throne that I just spoke about. Put some cushions on it because it's an old man, so you want to have it a little bit cushioned. And then they also put a carpet, a satin carpet on the stone staircase. So this is kind of the throne in action. And so with this image, I can end, and I'm open for question.